Stormwater Management Advisory Committee meeting, the work session meeting. And Dan, or do you want to present where you are with the projects and the
If you recall, this is really the task where we do two things. We first identify potential flood mitigation projects in the different study areas, and then we model those and we determine the benefits of those for flood reduction. And in the next task, which we'll talk about in a little while, we will get to prioritizing those projects. So we talked 2 weeks ago about the types of projects that we were looking to identify as part of this work. We divided those into really 3 types of projects: basin scale systems. That's our term for things like the Banbury-Francis project. These are storage and infiltration systems, primarily bioretention, constructed wetlands. This would also include any kind of residential stormwater BMP program that we might institute. Detention basin retrofits, that's something that we're also going to talk about. We also looked at green streets, so working within the public right-of-way, whether it's a commercial street. I think the only one we had was Lancaster. There were two areas of Lancaster that we looked at, and then residential green streets. And then the third type were the conveyance. We kind of lumped these together: conveyance and stream channel restoration, floodplain enhancement type projects. So not storing so much as trying to provide better conveyance options. What I've added here, there's numbers in parentheses. So those are the number of each type of project that we identified. This was the longer list of projects. Remember, we looked at about 50 projects, or we identified about 50 projects initially. And then we wanted to screen that back, and I'm going to really talk about how we screen back and what we screen back to. So a lot of this is repeated from 2 weeks ago, how we came, what types of projects we found, where we found them, where we looked, assumed sizing. Again, we kind of covered that 2 weeks ago, so I'm not going to spend much time on that now. That is the overall township map with the various study areas, and anything, again, that has a color associated with it and a letter. There's 7 of them. JK is 1. So there's 7 of those. Those are what we're calling priority problem areas, or at least the recommended ones for modeling. So now I want to get to new information. So I did meet with Steve this week, Steve Norsini. We went through the list of projects, list of potential projects, and we took out some, we added some, really tried to get his validation on where we were going and the types of projects that we're going to then do the detailed modeling for. When I met with him, some of his comments, I'm just summarizing them here. He had lots of good comments. Some of the more general ones were he wanted to see more realistic assumptions for the residential BMPs. So at one point we were just saying, all right, pie in the sky, if we did 100% of this area, this is the amount of capture we get, and this is the cost. We knew that was not feasible. So the question is, what do we want to go with? So we did scale that back quite a bit. I believe we scaled it back to something on the order of like 10%, just to start. Whether that's too high still, that's open for debate. Green streets is another one. These are more of the residential green streets. We were assuming certain streets we'd capture 100% of the right-of-way area for all the different streets we identified. Again, he thought maybe that was ambitious, not realistic. So we scaled that back. I think I assume 50% of those, and we can adjust those variables at any time. That's easy.
Dan, when you say you capture 100% of a green street, what does that mean?
So it's the area within the right-of-way, the impervious area within the right-of-way, sidewalks, curb-to-curb pavement in the street. We identified, depending on the area, and we can talk about specifics, but depending on the area, we identified, okay, these 6 streets from this block to this block are good candidates for green streets. And green streets can take different forms. A lot of the streets we saw in the township have mature street trees. There's some, obviously, that don't, but a lot of them do, and we don't want to impact those. So a lot of these systems might not be along the entire length of the street, but maybe at the end of the street, we would have what we would call like a bump out, a vegetated bump out or curb extension, which is basically like a little rain garden. The curb bumps out into the street where you would have a parking stall, and you would put a rain garden. And maybe you would have some additional storage beyond that. So we're really trying to target like an inch to capture the right-of-way runoff, 100% of it. So we scaled that back. Again, this could still change even as we get into the detailed modeling, but we just scaled that back to just say 50% to have a more realistic assumption. We also, as we looked at all the different projects and all the different areas, we looked at the specific characteristics of those areas, the opportunities, the limitations for each area. And so for some areas...
Dan, could you go back to the Poplar Avenue?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I skipped over that one. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes, but that was an idea that Steve had, obviously, for the North Wayne area. It's something that we had not been looking at, but Steve's idea is starting at Poplar, where the pipes discharge into the creek, could we consider an option that is essentially a large diameter pipe that would run east along Poplar all the way down to Radnor Street Road, turn south on Radnor Street Road, and possibly either go right into the creek, which, we'd have to look at that and what that would do downstream, or bring it into a system in Cowan Park, some kind of underground system in Cowan Park. It's township land, obviously. It's not huge, but it's a park. There's some space there, so maybe that's an overflow pipe idea from Poplar. So yeah, sorry I missed it. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So again, I'm just kind of going through why we kept certain projects in and we took out certain projects. So the next bullet, again, we looked at each area and we really used our judgment. There's some areas where we have very limited opportunity, so we have to look at residential BMPs. That may be a tough sell, or at least to get a large enough amount of these areas where it's going to have an impact. We may be forced to look in the street, in right-of-ways. Other areas, maybe we do have more larger spaces that we can work with. Like area JK, we have Beau Connor Park and Philippone Park, the 2 parks that are together, a large public space. Maybe we don't really need to focus on residential BMPs in those locations. So it was a mix of looking at the size of the drainage area, the potential capture volume, but as Regina said 2 weeks ago, we can't. I don't think we can just look at that. We also have to look at, in the context of each individual area, what makes the most sense, and also having somewhat of a balance of public and private. Ownership is key. Again, the easiest in a certain way will be public lands, obviously, and I'm lumping the school district in with the township as public. But at the same time, we understand that private parcels, private owners, commercial and residential, have to be part of the solution. There's just not enough space, not enough public space to do everything that needs to be done. There's a lot of water in each area. North Wayne, there's a lot of water that comes from out of the township. So we just don't have enough space within the public right-of-way. So we have to look at private areas. And that gets to what I'm calling for now demonstration opportunities, the public-private partnerships. A lot has to be worked out with that, obviously, to make that feasible, but it really has to be part of the solution. And then constructability. is certainly another one we looked at. This is somewhat more qualitative. I know it's Maya question. What does that mean? And could we provide a little bit more definition? And when we talk about constructability, ease of construction is another way to say that. We're really looking at what's our feel for this project in terms of its potential impacts on businesses during construction, existing utilities, traffic, pedestrian. What's it going to mean to actually build this? It looks good on paper, but tearing up Lancaster Avenue to do appreciable storage is a big deal. And obviously it has a huge cost implication. So this is a summary slide of the projects that we screened down to. So we screened down to 29 projects, and you can see how they fall across each of the priority problem areas. So after talking to Steve, I think the idea was some areas might have more projects because the problems might be greater. Others might be less. Area G, for example, which is the lower eastern area of Ithan, east of the Blue Route, that's not an area that Steve considers hugely problematic from a flooding perspective. So he said, well, why don't we screen down to only 2 projects there, and we can talk about what those are. So really, this is just how it breaks down. So just going right to the totals, 29 projects, 17 of them are public, township or school district owned. 12 of them are on private lands, and some of those private projects would include areas of residential BMPs. So it's there's multiple sites within that one project, if you will. Then looking at the types of projects, you can see most of them are these basin scale projects, the constructed wetlands or the bioretention or just the Banbury-esque storage underground, storage with infiltration underground, whether it's pavement or a vegetated surface. 4 green streets, and again, some of these, what we call one project, might be multiple green streets, multiple blocks on one street also. And then conveyance or stream channel type projects, we saw about 6 of those. So that's just how it breaks down. And then
with business, with private, how many of those are business versus residential?
That's a good question. I think, we have to look at the individual ones, but I think it's might be roughly half. Actually, maybe it's slightly more on the commercial or non-residential side, I should say. So I'm just going to go through quickly, stop me if you have questions. But I'm going to go through each of the areas, starting with A. This is downtown Wayne. This it's a little hard to see, but each area on these maps against the aerial is outlined in red. These maps are what we're calling opportunity parcels. Not sure if that's the right title or not, but really what we can see here are the areas that are township-owned, school district-owned, or other types of lands. So we can just see the areas that are colored. I think the theme for all of these is that they're fairly limited. There's not a lot of these spaces, and obviously the right-of-way, that the streets are not they're not colored, but they're in there, and those are opportunities as well. If the title of the street, the name of the street is in yellow, that means it's a state route. So for Area A, we ended up with these 4 projects. 2 of these we've already modeled in detailed fashion, probably more detailed than we would get for this study, because these are really detailed, if you recall, for the Ithan work. But the Runnymede Avenue lot and then the South Wayne parking lot, the 2 lots that are right next to each other, it makes sense to keep those in and now run the model in. Now that we have greater context, we have a more detailed, refined model with the surface and the subsurface systems in place. Then there's A3, which is still, still needs to be defined a little bit more, but the idea, and this was through my conversations with Steve, this is back to South Wayne Avenue, and it's not so much crossing the street with piping, because I think we've been directed at least that that's problematic. And we knew that. That's been well known with all the utilities. It would take more money, more investigation to really have a real solution that works with a crossing. But what this is, it's looking at what can we do if we don't cross, if we have new inlets, new pipes on the east side of the street that connect into the system. So it will help relieve the flooding that's happening on South Wayne, get the water into the system. That's the idea there, and we would model that as part of this effort. And then the fourth option, or the fourth project that we would look at, is the AT&T lot, also known as the Bellevue lot. And that's the one, I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit. So that's the one, it's right on Lancaster. It's this lot here. It's south of the AT&T facility. So it's privately owned. But it's right off of 30. We can potentially capture or redirect some of the flow from 30 into that. It has enough area coming into it already that it makes it interesting. So it could be another solution, one of several that really gets to solving this problem, or at least reducing the flooding problem in South Wayne.
Dan, can you go back? I
Sure.
guess it's a
Yep.
couple to those projects. So 3 of these 4 are downstream projects, kind of like, landing where the flooding is in the town. There isn't anything up that we can do in this watershed? Like looking to the west, or?
Well, that's a very good question. So, this is what we've got. There's obviously a lot of private parcels in here, a lot of residential parcels, in the southern area of this. It has to do with the opportunity. The opportunity is at the bottom. It's right upstream or right where it's flooding, but it's there. It's publicly owned land that could be used. We're not. It's not in the right of way. We don't have, in theory, we don't have as many utilities to worry about. Generally, it's flat. Although I know that the lot on South Wayne has some slope to it. But yeah, that's the idea.
So in the modeling, will we look at having a lot of residential BMPs upstream and see if they do anything? We've been trying to say upstream, and here we're at the bottom, it seems.
Well, right. So I think that other areas we'll see lend themselves to the residential BMP program more so. Residential BMPs, if everyone had that, if everyone had a rain garden or multiple rain gardens and rain barrels, obviously it would do a lot of good, and we should certainly advocate for that. But if it's something that we want to target, and model, and really target and understand what the benefits are, again, I think there might be other areas that would be better suited for that. But again, something that could be looked at in any of these areas.
Yeah, maybe I should ask it in the negative. If you do a lot, does it do anything? Because I think we went through that exercise once. I think, it'd be good to make sure we look at that at least.
Right. So it gets to what are we talking about? What are we putting in? What do we want to assume can be done on a residential parcel? 2 rain barrels and a small rain garden probably won't be enough to get an inch off, say the entire house or even all the impervious on the site. But even if we could do that, again, what do we assume as far as the coverage in terms of the number of houses that would do this?
Again, I'm just trying to say, okay, so we could do 100%, 50%, 10%, just so that people know. When people come back and say, well, you ought to push residential BMPs, we can say, well, we did it with 100% coverage and it only had 10% impact, so that's not where we should put our effort.
Right. Yeah, I think 100% coverage would be interesting, and I think we would see a dent. What the size of that dent would be, I'd have to look, but I think we would see a dent with 100% coverage, meaningful residential BMPs, meaningfully sized. I think we would see a dent. We wouldn't eliminate flooding probably in these areas, but we would see a dent.
Yeah, I just think that ought to be part of that.
Sure. So for each area, we have maps that look like this. And the green dots, if you can see those, there's yellow dots and there's green dots, although they look pretty similar up on the screen there. But the yellow dots, or I should start with the green dots, are those projects that we would recommend be advanced for the more detailed modeling as part of our scope of work. The yellow dots were other ideas. In this case, some of these were carryovers from the ITHN work. They should stay out there as ideas, and I know there's a couple, there's this, on North Wayne, there's a public parking lot that's there. There's another one on, I think it's Waynewood Avenue, I think that's right. I know Steve liked those projects. They don't get a whole lot, but they could be good demonstration projects. You know, they could be, if grant money comes along, those could be good projects. You know, they're publicly owned, and you could have a parking lot retrofit program where you retrofit all the municipal parking lots with porous pavement or, you know, bioswales, something along those lines. We just don't see them as really meaningful for this study, just because you can see where they are. They're kind of at the top of the watershed, or at a corner of the watershed, don't get a lot of runoff to them. And then we look at the maps. So we just, in these, the second maps for each of these, we just take away the drainage areas. So these blue areas represent the approximate catchment area. There's some level of interpretation and judgment that goes with these. In some cases, we're assuming that, yes, we can run a pipe for 50 feet and we can bring in this area. And in some cases, like in this case here, the school district lot on Runnymede, you know, that area is potentially bigger than that, or could be bigger than that. But so they're approximate. This purple area really represents an area of what could be residential BMPs. That's an area that it looks like for us would make sense to think about residential BMPs, although we're not recommending it for this study area. So, and then this is just a blow up showing the projects that we're recommending, those 4 green ones. And then these locations are just the previously documented flood locations, the overlapped ones from the model and previously documented. So we look at Area B, and Area B is directly downstream of Area A. And when we run the model, really this really ends up being one model, one area. So things that we do in A will certainly benefit problem areas in B. So it all flows downstream from A. So we will certainly see benefits from A projects. So with that said, we ended up with 5 projects in B. The first one, probably my favorite one, I think it has a lot of potential, is Veterans Park. It's strategically located to get a lot of water to it, publicly owned park. We'll talk a little bit more about that. There is a master plan that's been done by Simone Collins, landscape architects. It's been around for a couple of years now. We did talk about that for the ITHN study as well. Midland Avenue, this is a concept, again, that's been kicking around since the Chagrin Valley study, which I think, you know, now we have an opportunity to run that in the model, to integrate that in the model and see what the benefit would be. So this would be a large diameter pipe that would start a little bit west of Aberdeen and go down all the way east to Pembroke and then down Pembroke, and it would eventually tie back into the pipes on Pembroke. So this would be a large diameter pipe really to provide relief capacity. I've talked to Steve about, you know, could this be have a perforated bottom so we would get some infiltration along the way, if that makes sense. I know the folks on Midland may just want to get the water away from them and not more into the ground. So, but that's another idea if we wanted to make that more of a, you know, volume reduction type project, or at least get a little bit of volume reduction. Steve was adamant that the Ivan Avenue culverts should be included in this, obviously right outside the Township building here. The idea there is, you know, when that floods, emergency responders are potentially impacted. So that's a big deal. So that will be included. Wayne Square Shopping Center. where the Five Guys and Panera and yeah, that shopping center might be a good idea. It's a large, relatively flat area. That could be a good opportunity for a public-private partnership type project. It's certainly not the only one along 30. We can pick any number of sites, but this is one that could get a lot of capture. I think it's a lot that could be improved or could use some improvement. So again, a lot would have to be worked out with the owner. What's the benefit to them? What do they get out of it? And then the final option is what we're calling here various residential green streets. And as we include here in the description, there's a number of sites in here: Midland, St. David's, Pembroke, Windermere Ave, Aberdeen Ave, Orchard Way. So all of these would be modeled as a collective whole. We could do them individually. That obviously adds a lot of computing time. We'd like to do it more generally. If we do all these streets, this is the benefit. That can obviously be scaled back. That number of projects it may be a big cost, but at least we can see if we do all these streets, if we manage an inch of all these streets, the community gets benefits from those. There's a lot of public benefits from green streets. There's traffic calming benefits. So there's other ancillary benefits to those. And we can at least see what the benefit would be from a flood reduction standpoint.
Dan, can I ask, for the two pipe conveyance ones, and this is just my ignorance, I thought there was a problem if you make something bigger that the people downstream would complain because you're giving them more water. Is that?
Well, that's a good question, and that needs to be looked at and needs to be understood. Yes, we can't. In the case of Ivan Avenue, so there's, obviously it goes right to the Township site, the park. There's space there. So if we relieve the flooding, if we get the flooding to pass to downstream, by the time it would get to somewhere where it would cause problems, street flooding or residence flooding, we would have to look downstream enough that we can determine that would not be the case, at least at this level. Now, in the case of Midland, it's the same thing. So, but in that case, conveyance is a little bit of a misnomer. It's more like a storage system, really. It's like a bladder. It's a big pipe that would charge. Would start to see flow in, say, a certain event. If it reaches a certain level, it starts to flood the pipe and not the street. That's the idea. But again, we'd have to look. Well, what's going to happen at the downstream end? Is it going to make things worse? We don't want to make it worse anywhere else. I mean, that would be we would fail. I mean, that would be a failure of this effort. So these projects, these are what we think are the best solutions for these different areas. None of them, this goes for all the areas, none of them I think is a silver bullet. I don't think any of these is big enough, has a big enough scale that it's going to be a silver bullet. But we'll see when we model these, we'll model them individually and we'll model them collectively. So we'll see, what does Veterans Park do alone? What does that concept do alone? And then we'll see, well, if we did all 5 of these, what's going to be the benefit to flooding overall? And I'm pretty sure that to get to that level for any of these study areas is not going to be a cheap solution, obviously, but over many years, hopefully we'll work to that. It's coming down. Good time to talk about stormwater. So here are the locations for B. Again, I think we're all pretty familiar with where these are. So B1, just for your recollection, that's Veterans Park. It's right along Route 30. I think if you don't know it's there, you might just drive right by it. I know I did several times before I knew it was there. Obviously Midland. So some of these, I think B5 and B8 are more of the general ones. They're just kind of generally located. So this is Veterans Park, from the master plan by Simone Collins, if anyone has seen this before. This is just a rendering of what I think that the project is meant to look like eventually. So I think that the idea here is that there's a lot of programming in the front of the site that we would certainly really, we would not intend to touch that. Maybe you could do something below that, but there's a lot of space behind it, a lot of green space. It's relatively flat. So again, a good opportunity. And what's really nice, if I go back to this, so what I didn't point out before is that we have all these pipes that are coming down from the northeastern corner of this drainage area. They all come through, right through the southern part of this park. So it's a fairly sizable area. And then you even have Lancaster itself, you can see, is running west. You could, in theory, redirect that flow into a system here. So you can capture a sizable amount of area in a sizable space. Now, again, my idea for this is that this would be buried. Again, like a Banbury project, we would try to get as much storage underground as we could. And you wouldn't know it was there. It would be, you would still have the functionality of this park. Area G, this is Kirk's Run. This is, again, Blue Route is here on the west side of the screen here. We've got, I'm blanking, Agnes Irwin School, which is the big purple area. Not a whole lot else, a lot of residential, but really you can see there's not a lot of big, juicy opportunities, for us. There is a development here with a number, at least 3 detention basins that would be good opportunities for retrofits, and we picked one of those. So as I mentioned, so Steve looked at this area, and you can see that the red dots indicate the problem locations. There's only 2. He's not aware of this being a significant problem from flooding. So with that in mind, he said he would rather us focus our efforts having more projects in other areas than this one. So one project that looked interesting was the Rosemont Presbyterian Village, where we could do a bioretention system. I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. And then I mentioned those 3 detention basins. Essentially, we picked one. It was the one that had the biggest drainage area to it. And that could be a candidate for retrofit. Now, Courtney's talked a lot about the MS4 requirements and then the pollutant reduction plan. I think detention basin retrofits will be much more interesting when it comes to water quality, because we can, without messing around too much with the hydraulics of these basins, we can improve the water quality quite a bit, especially some of these 1970s era or 80s era basins, which are just big grass basins, without much water quality benefit. So I think those have really good opportunity for improving water quality. Now, from a flood reduction standpoint, we have to be careful, and at a conceptual level, we can be a little bit more liberal with our assumptions, but we want to be careful that we're not trying to store too much water in one of these basins. That can cause a failure of one of these basins. The question is then who maintains it. These are privately owned. There's typically a finite amount of space. Maybe some could be made, literally bigger in terms of footprints. Maybe some could be made deeper. But we have limited options when it comes to retrofitting. But from a water quality perspective, I think we've got good opportunities. But questions on that? So this is what the area looks like. And if we kind of zoom in, so G6 is one of the ones that we were going to model. This is what it looks like now. I'm not sure how deep that is, but that is water, standing water that's there. So again, we can look. A lot of times we don't have the access to the design plans for these sites. I have to look. We might have this one. I'm not sure. But again, we have to look and be careful about what we assume we can actually do more than it's already doing. And the other question is, should we attempt to bring more water into these systems? And that's, again, we have to be careful about that. For the most part, actually, let me take that back. These basins are entirely being fed by these private developments. So could we bring in more runoff from the private development? Again, there's a lot of issues that would have to be worked out.
Dan, why not? I mean, G8 just looks a lot more populated than G6. Is it just because we can get to G6?
Well, G8, so G8 and G5 are the two other basins. And when you say populated, so it might just be because it's getting cut off. Let me go back. It's hard to see there. But from what we could tell of the drainage areas, the one, G8, the one that we chose, had the larger drainage area that was coming into it. But yeah, really, we could have picked any of them, to be honest. I think any of them could have been good opportunities for demonstrating, this project type. And the other one was the Rosemont Presbyterian Village, G1. That looks like, so that's down here. And that looks like this. Really, it's just a kind of a green space at the bottom of this site, the back corner of this site. There's also a little bit of green space at the other end of the site. This is a parking lot right here. So again, it looks like you can see the red lines indicating the storm pipes. They all kind of come here, and there's an outfall. So it's all getting there now anyway. Could this space be turned into something what we were thinking of as like a bioretention system? A densely vegetated basin that would improve water quality and would have some flood reduction benefits as well. Area I, you may have heard of. This is the North Wayne area. We've been talking about this a lot. We have a lot of ideas here. So we ended up, there's 7 solutions, and 2 of these kind of work hand in hand. There's the North Wayne Field. Obviously, we've looked at that a lot in terms of the proposed basin and the restored basin. What this would be is yet another option, another alternative, which would be to, as we talked about before, redirect a sizable area and bring it into the North Wayne Field. I'm talking, 40 plus acres of additional land. This would entail another look at what could be done in the field, and Sugar and Valley did a lot of work. They've looked at a lot of different options, and I think it was option H, I think is what they got up to, which was, I believe the most expensive option that had a big underground system that took up a lot of the site. And frankly, that I think doing something like this, bring all that water in, would, necessitate or justify a larger scale project like that. So, this is going to be a costly project. It's going to entail hundreds of feet of large diameter pipe, but it could have substantial benefits. So that's what I1 is. I2 is the Church of the Savior. We talked about that. That's a really good opportunity for a detention basin retrofit. I'm not sure the year that was designed or constructed, but it clearly it's been there for some time. There's some additional space to make it bigger. I think we can make it deeper. So that there is potential there. What good it will do, we'll determine that when we run the model with that in place.
Dan, you're talking about how the retrofits were in large part water quality. And so that wouldn't help us for our MS4 though, because that's not in our township, right?
Well,
you could share, if you partner with an adjacent municipality, I believe there is a way to share credit, although if it's upstream and if it's out of your MS4 drainage area, I think we have to look at that, but there is a way to share credit.
If it's existing, does that count? I'm just thinking this MS4 thing. If there's an existing basin,
Yeah. Well, you would retrofit it, so that would be the project.
Folks, in case you hear it sounds like something's going on, firing range, so don't be upset.
So then, looking south of the train tracks, so we think that, again, we're trying to do a lot of incremental improvements, to really get at this problem, which is a significant problem. And one of those, or a couple of those, are south of the train tracks that feed into the existing North Wayne Basin. And one of those is the West Avenue idea. And so this would be really nothing more than, again, fitting storage underground like the Banbury project, so in West Avenue. So I'm saying this could be from the AT&T lot to Francis Avenue. We can talk about where, what the extent of that could be. And as we model, we may say, well, if this were double, we'd really get good benefit, and that's something we can look at. Cowan Park, I mentioned, that only really makes sense to us, or to me, if we get a lot more water to it. It's a good opportunity in that it's a publicly owned park, but it's at the bottom of the study area. It's kind of downstream of where a lot of these problems occur. So can we, and this was Steve's idea, the I-12 concept is the Poplar Avenue bypass pipe. I'm not sure bypass is the right word, but the idea is that we're going to convey extreme event water down to Cowan Park and store it there and release it slowly back into the stream. There are opportunities, I think, for green streets on North Wayne. Now, North Wayne is obviously state-owned, so that may bring with it certain challenges. But there's a lot of other township-owned streets, the residential streets, Beach Street, Woodland, Walnut. A lot of these streets have some width to them, generally flat, which are typically good things when we think about green streets. Maybe we can put the roads on a diet. We call them, put them on a road diet, literally make them skinnier and add some more green space and make that functional green space that could absorb some of the water. We're not going to get probably more than an inch and a half in these systems, but we do enough of them, we'll start to see a dent. This probably needs a better name, but we're calling it the railroad ditch. That's the channel that runs along the southern side of the tracks. We could probably improve that with Amtrak's permission, partnership. Could be improved. We could slow that water down. We could, make better use of that space. It's already happening now to some extent. If it flowed right through, things would be even worse downstream. But could we make it better? And I think it's deep enough and wide enough that I think we can. And I mentioned the Poplar Ave bypass idea. So just kind of zooming in. So this is what that ditch looks like now. Actually, this is it gets deeper than that. This is more along the western end where it's getting shallower, but it kind of does drop down quite a bit. If anyone's been in that AT&T lot, you look down. It's there's a drop off there. And that was the day, I think this was on September 29th. So there was a rain event there, not one of the worst ones by far, but that is running water that was through there. And it was enough even on that day.
Dan, there had been a project that had been considered, but I think put off into the distant future, having to do with evacuation issues from the street at Willow and Radnor Street. It was one of the projects that on the budgeting had been put off to at least 2021 because of a lack of funds.
Oh.
Would that be made moot by the kind of things you're talking about on the Poplar bypass and or the Cowan Field projects you're suggesting?
I think yes. I think the answer is yes. I think that would be made moot. I think that was a very localized problem with a very localized solution.
My
But
recollection, it was like a $300,000 to $500,000 project, having to do with the re-engineering and reinstallation of drainage outlets
Yeah.
on Willow and Radnor Street.
yeah, and I think with this poplar idea, this poplar pipe idea, I think that goes away, because I think you would, as part of that, you could put new inlets there, and they would go right to this larger pipe.
Especially if it's conveyed down Willow Avenue.
Right, right. I should mention along Plant Avenue, we've talked about this before, I think, but there's this green, see that kind of funky shaped green area that is township-owned land. There's a garage on there. I did talk to Steve and the township manager about that. Again, it's from it being a township-owned parcel, it's potentially an opportunity. I just think it's small. It's small enough that I don't know if it really makes sense. What would we do there? We can widen the stream there, and that might help a little bit, but I don't think it's going to have a huge benefit, frankly. So we didn't look at that any further for now. So JK, this is the area of Darby, the only area of Darby that we're looking at, but it's right at the top in terms of the township's land. There's a lot going on here. There's a lot of impervious, a lot of commercial along 30, but there are some great opportunities, and we certainly are not the only ones that have thought of these. But they're too good to overlook now. And there's the Beau Connor Park and Warren Philippone Park, big green space, upstream of flooding. Really makes a lot of sense to look at that space as maybe maybe one of the could end up being one of the top priority projects that's at least not in North Wayne. And then there's the West Wayne Preserve, the Levin Tract. Again, has a fairly sizable drainage area that comes to it right now. It's probably doing a lot of good now. It's a wetland. There's been obviously a lot of talk about that in years past, about improving that. So what we have here are 4 projects. I mentioned Connor Philippone Parks, the Levin Tract. There's the Radnor Trail, which I'll show you what that looks like. There's an area of it where we thought there was an opportunity to make a vegetated swale alongside of it. It had a large enough drainage area that could be at least partially managed in that. Probably not, I'm going to just say it's probably one of the lower priorities. Maybe it's the least priority of these 4, but I think it was worth looking at. And then there's the farmer's market parking lot. Its location was good. From a project perspective. And again, it could be a good private-public partnership opportunity.
Where is that? I mean, can I see the picture before? So the watershed starts where up north? For the farmer's market. I'm just trying to see the farmer's market.
Let me zoom in a little bit here. So JK7 is the farmer's market here. And you've got Eagle, you've got this pipe, which is showing going right under the farmer's market. I'm not sure if that's accurate or not, but so you've got, it's essentially right in line with that runoff that's coming through. Obviously, you're right next to Lancaster Ave. Maybe you can do something, you can take some of that runoff into it. Is that what you're wondering about? And here, this is the stretch of the trail where it looks like we could do a swale system alongside of it. You can see along, actually, I don't believe that's actually a pipe. I think that, that was actually, that was in the map info data that we inherited, and I believe that line is a swale, not a pipe. So there is a swale there now, but could it be enhanced? It looks like that. So it's having some benefit, but could we make it deeper, have some check dams, densely vegetate it, again, have a water quality benefit to it? And then, I thought it was interesting to show this. This is the rendering by Jonathan Alderson for the West Wayne Preserve. This is a vision for the site, not necessarily what could be, but it's certainly an option. I don't know if we would need to do a whole lot to make it even more functional. You might argue we don't have to do much at all, and maybe we just need to take credit or understand what's actually happening there.
These inlets, that's the biggest problem, the water can't get into it.
Mm.
Yeah, even from across the trail.
Yeah, there's little into pipe.
So just moving on, there's Area T. Now, Area T, this is Valley Run, Meadowbrook. It goes eventually to the Meadowbrook Run. This, you can see, is dominated by Villanova University, and obviously the work that's happening along 30 in the parking lots. There's a number of stormwater facilities that are associated with that. We did get the plans for those. We are including those in our model. We think that we will see benefits from those, downstream benefits. There's a lot of impervious that area will be helping to reduce runoff from. Beyond that, you can see that there's not a lot of clear-cut opportunities other than residential parcels and streets. Glen McCrone is down here at the bottom. There are plans underway for that site. I think you're all aware of those. There are a number of stormwater systems there to deal with the park runoff. There was talk of doing permeable asphalt parking lots. I think that has been thrown out because of the costs. But there are a number of bioswales and rain gardens and things like that in the site itself. But just thought I'd point that out. So we have 3 projects, all residential, either residential green streets. So these are public projects, but residential green streets, and then the parcels. So doing a targeted backyard, front yard BMP program. Not a whole lot else that we see could be done, again, in this area.
How about the cut where the Route 100 is? How does that cut where the Route 100 is? That's between Lancaster and Conestoga. The trolley.
So the land here, along the railroad. Yeah, there is some space available there. That's a good point, and we looked at that. I don't know if the drainage areas are all that compelling for that space. Well, it's generally, going this way.
Comes down to my wall.
But so here goes right down Lowry's Lane, probably. So we can look at that again. I mean, that might be worthwhile. You can see here the problem areas that were documented and modeled. So these are the ones that we had looked at. Let me just zoom in. So again, most of these dots really just represent general locations, because it's not, here we're talking about more distributed types of systems. I show a picture of T2, which there's a number of these circular grassed islands. There's one here and one here and one here. So those could be made functional. What function do they have right now, other than just providing?
Who owns that?
I believe that's in the township right away. And then the last area is Area U. Actually, there were a number of different things that we saw in this one. You can see that there's problem areas are kind of scattered, more or less along the stream channels, pretty much all along the stream channels. So there's the Radnor House Apartments, and I believe Steve has had some contact with them earlier this year. I believe There's been some interest in partnering with the township, possibly to reduce stormwater fees or what have you. But so, as it turns out, I think there's some opportunities there. There's that large green space. That's, well, I think you all know what that looks like. Oh, it's locked up.
Near the trail? Is that what? No.
Isn't that across from the McDonald's, right on Lancaster, that tall apartment building?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that way.
Lancaster and County Lawn.
Yeah, right across from the McDonald's.
Sorry, I had to restart the PowerPoint. Okay. I think I went too fast. So yeah, we know what that looks like. It's that large green space. Not a huge drainage area to that, but there's some, and it's a highly visible site. Could be a good opportunity for public-private partnership. And you can see that there is a lot of water that gets piped through that site, so there is some potential there. If I go back. So there's the Montrose condominiums, which is another detention basin retrofit. I'll show you a picture of that. Again, it looks like an older basin, could be made potentially to have better performance from downstream flooding perspective and also water quality. Residential parcels, we see this as an area that it's worth, in our opinion, it's worth looking at residential parcels to see what kind of benefit we can get. And we can turn the dial. We can go crazy and say, what if we do 50%? What will that do? 100%? What will that do? And then there's home properties of Bryn Mawr, which is a parking lot type retrofit project. It looks like a lot of drainage flows alongside or under this parking lot, which I'll show you where that is. So it could be an opportunity. And that one is there. Yeah, I think the dot's a little bit.
The trolley is through there, so, and it's lower.
Okay. So here, that's that one basin. So U3, that's that existing detention basin. That's what it currently looks like. Again, maybe it has some potential to be expanded, deepened, enhanced, reasonably so. And then U7 is really just the generic or the general location for the residential BMPs. Yeah, sure.
Was that, in the middle, right where your arrow is that road, is that Conestoga?
That's the trolley.
That's the trolley, okay.
Yes. Yeah, right. So, yeah, that one particular detention basin, yeah, that discharge is like right under that, and there's a known flooding problem like right at that location, right at the underpass. So that could potentially directly help with that.
The only reason I mentioned that was because I thought I remember 2 or 3 years ago, there was a landscape architect who, as you come under Conestoga and you go under that bridge, that right before you go under the bridge and you go around the curve, that they looked at doing some sort of vegetative channel, and he had check dams throughout there.
Stone area.
Because right now, it's really just kind of an overgrown area.
And
but,
that's this is like a wedge
Right.
in here. Yeah, I was looking at that too.
And I think they even, a couple years ago, were
I wasn't
gonna-
aware that there were somebody looking.
We have a grant.
to do that, right. But I thought maybe when they were,
It's the runoff area for the BMW.
I just remember watching meetings a couple years ago that they were thinking it would be a project, and then maybe they tied into Clem Macron, but it never went through, right?
It's a standalone project.
It's a standalone,
And it's a gateway, if you will, into Garrettville.
right. Which would look nice, but also serve as a good stormwater.
I remember some
feature.
discussion about that and about who would maintain that, because that's on SEPTA property, I believe. And there were some concerns about ongoing maintenance.
John fought that.
Is that something that we should reconsider or consider for this? I mean,
It would help mobilize the other project.
Which way's the water flow? I'm sorry, I just,
It's going to the, you're going to the right because you're going under that.
You can see-
oh, that's right, it's downhill. So that would help that spot, yeah?
Then there's this whole big swath, there's this big green space. There is some slope to that, but I think the problem there is like, what would we get to that location? We'd have to reroute some of these pipes over to here. Although there is an outfall here, it looks like, of some sort. So there's that opportunity as well. Private land, obviously, but. This is just the summary table that I showed before. So really next step is to, assuming you all agree, or maybe there's some questions about some other things we want to look at, but for the most part, we want to move forward and start modeling these sites, these projects. We would refine the sizing. We're not designing them, obviously, as part of this, but we have to at least give them enough definition. It's going to be this big, it's going to be this deep, enough definition that it can be modeled, and that we could get a cost, planning level cost, but we'd have a cost associated with that. And then, so we would do that, we would model them, and then we were going to do what we were going to talk about next, which is the prioritization part of this.
So when you model, you'll look at like all combinations or?
Well, that gets tricky. So we're proposing to model each project individually and then model them collectively. So we can see, if we do this suite of projects, what will the benefit be? We could get into combinations. I think then, then we start to really, stretch our scope and our budget, because I think we could endlessly look at the different combinations.
Well, you just talked about one of them where you said we'd run them all and we run them one at a time, and I
Yes.
wasn't sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what we're proposing to do. We'd run them each individually, and then we'd run them all together.
Okay.
But now I mentioned Cowan Park and the poplar pipe. They're two separate, but they're really one. I think they work hand in hand. Maybe we just end up calling it one concept. I think we separated them because you could have a poplar pipe option that doesn't go to the Cowan Park, goes back into the stream, if that made sense. It would be like kind of the Midland option where, that pipe is acting as storage, as relief. We're going to have a finite amount of space. We're not going to have, an 8-foot pipe, but a long, several 100-foot long, 48-inch diameter pipe will have, a significant amount of storage potentially.
The other question I had is, these are all designed to alleviate flooding, and I don't know, I'm just learning about MS4, so are any of these going to be are the choices going to be driven somewhat by MS4 requirements?
Well, so again, I think that's going to get to prioritizing these projects and how important, how important, we can set the weight, right? Could set the weight of water quality, and how important is that, and I mentioned some projects will have a greater water quality benefit than a flood reduction benefit, I think. I think that most of these projects will have some benefit for water quality. Like the Ivan Avenue culvert enlargement, that's probably not going to have a lot of water quality benefit.
Well, there's a difference between choosing a project because it has a water quality benefit and you have to do it to meet a water quality requirement. I guess that is that a real distinction? I don't know.
The PRP, the stated goal of the PRP is to reduce your sediment by 10% over 5 years. So the municipality is required to plan for 5 years worth of projects and to show that they reduce sediment by 10% from your baseline, whatever that baseline is. So there will be projects that are selected or that come out of that PRP planning process that are targeted to meet that 10%. The detention basins are probably the lowest hanging fruit because they're probably the least expensive and they give you a really, really good benefit. So if it just so happens they provide solely water quality benefit, then that would be a PRP chosen project. But it's a little different from these projects, which I think are flood driven or flood reduction driven primarily.
So I'm just, again, got to help me here. So is the MS4, there's a hard limit here that we have to meet, the 10%. Is that part of this prioritization, or is that a separate prioritization?
I think it's one of the criteria we have listed, because then you have multiple benefits, and you certainly want to try to pick a project that achieves the multiple priorities.
Yeah, I know Steve has talked about that. When these MS4 requirements were coming out, the new ones, I think he's claimed that should certainly be part of this effort. When we think of these projects, we should be thinking about that as well. And ideally, we get projects that have significant flood reduction benefits and then also improve water quality. So I think the focus is on flood reduction, but I think, again, and this is how we need to set that, set the weight of water quality types of criteria. We might set it at very high. So those were all the slides I had on the projects. Again, I guess the question is, I don't know if you want to vote or just recommend that we move forward with this list that Steve has gone over. There's a couple questions maybe on that one that we just talked about. I was not aware of a project that had been looked at. Is this the right one?
Do you know what that looks like? I mean, you know what that is?
I've seen it, not in person, but
it's a pretty steep grade. It's a pretty ugly area.
We can revisit that and take another look and see if that's one that we want to, if it's worth investigating, worth adding.
Yeah, just because it's right upstream of a flooding, it
Right.
seems like it's really.
And with the residential BMPs, again, I think it's easy enough that we can look at some different options for that. Maybe 10%, 50%, 100%, something along those lines. We can just say even if the point is even if we do 100%, it's not going to do a whole lot. That it still tells us something. And again, it's not to say we shouldn't advocate for that. We have the rebate program. I don't know how much we've given out, or it hasn't been a lot. But in any case, any other questions or comments on that?
Just a comment on the rebate, and that is that, there's a difference between saying, here, get a rebate, and saying we go to, Page's neighborhood and we saturate them with, say, buy a rain barrel, and just kind of make a push for it in a particular place because it will help blah, 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 blah. So that's a different, more targeted approach that might get a lot more activity.
Yeah, you could buy 100 rain barrels and first come, first serve. I know that's been done, by a lot of communities.
Dan, I have a question. All of the projects that you've listed here, you're using some kind of priority to start at your 50 projects and drop them down to 25 and so on. We haven't really established our final set of priorities and how we want to weight them and so on. What priorities are you using, and how are you weighting them to get to this point?
Well, what, the one I presented before?
The one at the very top, that was your prioritization, I thought.
Let me go back to that.
What I'm referring to is the method he used. He prioritized, but what method did he use to prioritize? How did you weight? What are the criteria you used, and how did you weight it, essentially?
So it was more it was all of these things that I talked about before, and it was some judgment went into that because it was hard. We looked at the area, but as I mentioned before, we didn't just look at the capture area because we had to say, for this particular study area, what makes the most sense? What exists? What's there?
Where do we have the biggest problems? And your
Right.
biggest problem is defined by your flooding.
Right.
And we really didn't deal with the MS4 consequences at all. You took a look at where you had your major flooding, where you had your most complaints from township residents. I'm sure Steve had an input that says, we've got to really do something about this because. So that's the way I would do it if I were in your shoes, but I was curious if you'd actually come up with a table that you worked from. And it sounds like the answer is probably not. Not that you have to, it's just was my curiosity.
I mean, I looked at the areas of potential capture. I looked at the potential volume capture, ownership, but it wasn't a rigorous, prioritization scheme.
Understood.
Yeah.
And that's what you're going to use to get you down to the point where now we're taking a look at, say, 5, 7 projects, where we really
Right.
have to be rigorous and try and choose between those.
Right.
We have the political shortcomings, we have MS4 requirements, we've got all kinds of things that fall into that, and that's when we're going to need to have a very specific weighting system in order to determine which projects really rise to the top.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point.
If I could just jump in, I like to think of the 50 to 30 or 29 as like a screening, a professional screening or a technical screening, and then what comes next in task 5 is the prioritization, which is a more of a tool. We are using an actual tool that helps rank projects. And then and it just helps decision making. That's all. Doesn't mean you pick top, project number 1 over project number 4. It just shows how the priorities helped feed and goals help feed your program, essentially.
So I think that is a good segue if you want to talk about the next part of tonight, the workshop, or
So are you asking for us to say,
yeah,
yes,
maybe we
go ahead?
yes.
Ken Taylor, Willow Avenue. And you may be covering it under the next topic, the public meeting. It was, and I may have gotten this wrong. It was my express understanding from the last meeting was that the totality of the projects that you presented at the last meeting on the handouts were going to be called down using the kind of criteria that you seem to have used. Part of it was the total watershed area, the ownership, the volume reduction, what have you. But it was my understanding that the next round of culling would take into consideration the prioritization or priority rankings that the public would give at the public meeting. This is where I may have gotten it wrong. I did not understand that this board was going to do a further culling before the public meeting or the potential projects. I don't even know if you were going to present the identity of the potential projects to the public at the public meeting. But and if that wasn't your plan, I guess I'm going to suggest that maybe that is a way of doing it. Understanding, as this gentleman has indicated, that there are certain regulatory requirements that have to be prioritized above what the public interest or the public motive priorities are, and that's going to be a fudge factor that obviously has to be taken into consideration. But my suggestion would be that having this culled down to, I think was said 25, that perhaps the prioritization reaction of the public at the meeting could be utilized by this board in conjunction with Dan to cull to the next level.
I think my understanding is that from taking from the 50 down to the 29 is, we were looking to get to that level, 25 to 30 projects for the modeling, and that these would be, at the open house, that these would be noted as potential projects.
Yes, that's.
We would not be calling down.
We're doing what you
further.
want.
Yeah, oh, that's,
We would
again,
not be
my
going down
idea
further
was that the public might give you some insight, or it might actually help you, but for the regulatory factors, if there are priorities that are non-regulatory in nature, their input, while you may not want to go with it, it may be helpful. That's.
I'll make a motion that we ask Dan to move forward with this. I need a
A
second.
second? Second. Again, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so the next part is the prioritization part of this. I brought Courtney Finner in here again. She's been involved, obviously, with the MS4 stuff and public outreach and prioritization. She's been helping out with that as well. So, not sure. I do have some slides. I think we've covered some of these before. Some of the background. I don't know if we need to go through these. Actually, I don't know if we ever went through these or not. I know I've had these prepared for a while. Well, let me just skip that real quick. So, this is a slightly updated criteria list. You've seen this or a version of this before. Really, we just made a couple minor edits based on some of the feedback that you've given and we received from the public. But I think the idea is, that what we're missing here are the weights. Whether it's, so I say 0 to 100%, it can be 0 to 10 or whatever we wanted to do for that. We need some way to weight the importance of the various criteria, assuming that this is the right list. We've got flood volume reduction, runoff volume reduction, because we can reduce flood volume without reducing runoff volume. Flood location improved, and that's an awkward way of saying that, but that's something that we added given some of the feedback we received. That's really trying to get at, if this is something that's important, which I think it is, the location of the flooding, should that be taken into account? Lancaster Avenue floods in the business district versus, a residential street floods and 3 houses are impacted. So it's obviously a big deal for those 3 houses, but is it prioritized when, many, many, many more people are impacted? So
Why don't you just call it impact, or is that?
It could be that. It could just be flood impacts. I think it was just trying to get to the location. And then so we talked about water quality, MS4 requirements, the ownership, cost sharing and partnership opportunities. I'm not sure if cost sharing and partnership is one that we want to include in this, because maybe that really gets to the ownership. They're kind of related. And then there's O&M needs, public amenity, community asset, and then constructability. Before we had community amenity and community asset lumped with public safety, and I think there was a comment from Maya that they should be separated, and I think that was correct. I guess the only thing is public safety in and of itself a prioritization criteria, because I think that public safety is implied for all these projects.
But isn't it up there in flood location improved? Isn't that safety?
Yes, I would say it is implied in that as well. And are you talking about projects that don't make things worse from a public safety standpoint, or are you talking about projects that make things better than they are? So it's that would have to be further understood. And frankly, I don't know if you're going to see great differences between projects when we look at it that way. Now, from a flooding standpoint, yes, and that gets to the flood volume reduction and the location. But beyond that, I'm not sure if it makes sense to have a separate public safety. So I don't know if you wanted to add to that, but the thought was, how do we go about, what are the next steps? How do we get to those weights? I think at the last meeting, it was talked about, and Regina talked about, there's certain things that, should be not
Negotiable.
discussed.
Yeah.
There should be givens, if you will. So, flood volume reduction. Is that something that we want to put out there and let, whoever ends up being at that meeting that night have equal say on? I don't know.
Well, I like this because it takes it away from geographic preferences. Because people are going to come there and say, well, I want the problem resolved in my neighborhood. That's what they're going to say. And this is a way of abstracting it enough to say, well, what do you really care about the township-wide? So I like that. I guess my question was, does everybody think this covers it? From the board standpoint.
In my opinion, we need to even pare this down a little bit. I think it's more than coverage. It covers it. I agree with your point about the flood location. That's just a bad description, I think, or poor description, not bad, but poor description. I think that certainly can cover a lot of things. It's what our description is, and we know what it means. We can add to that description, which would change our weighting. But the more items you have to weight, the more difficult it becomes in your evaluation. And I think that let's say there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 items here. That would be a maximum for me. I would think that we'd want to be a little bit less. And I think the ownership, the cost sharing and partnership opportunities, that's one I would kicked out when I was reviewing this separately. Ownership's important because of public lands versus private lands and so on. But whether it's cost sharing or partnership, that would be a benefit that we would obtain once we started going. Once we decided that we really want to take this project to the next step, that's when we bring that in.
So,
Take that out. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I would
Yeah.
take that out. The rest of them are good with me, down to
Even down to the constructability, because to me, constructability is quite important. You can't bring the pipe across Lancaster Pike up at the school, for example, because of the utilities. It's not constructible.
So then you were just saying, are there ones that are given that we would take off the list just at the top?
Well, as he said that, I was sort of like, so it is a given. I mean, obviously we care about flood reduction. I mean, that's the point of the study. But to the extent that a project is the numeric range of per 1,000 cubic feet of volume reduced, so that new number, that actual volume that it's reduced, is going to vary by project. And so that is one part of the prioritization effort. And then it's the weight of this criteria that then gets calculated into how it all comes to be. So I wouldn't really recommend dropping off any of the obvious ones.
I agree. I think that you can give it a high weighting, and therefore, if it is a high weighting and everything else drops out, that's fine. But I don't think you can drop any of them off, Dan.
yeah, I guess just to clarify that, you all may say 100% is what the weight should be for the flood volume reduction, but if you put it out as a vote for whoever shows, I don't know. I'm just, maybe it ends up being less than that, and is that, contrary to what we want to do in this study?
So is there, I have some comments about how to do the weighting, but I'm wondering if you have a proposal how to do the weighting before I tell you what I think.
Well, I don't even want to know. To be perfectly honest, it would be an anonymous weighting strategy. So, when this is finalized or it's in a good place, it would be, the weights would be filled out by the participants. And it doesn't matter what your weights are, because that's the point of it, is that it's a very democratic, anonymous type of process. But if you have a comment on the process.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. I mean, first of all, you have to make it, this is a teacher who taught math. You have to make it so it adds up to 100, or how are you gonna do that to make it easy? And then,
Five criteria.
and then we're gonna educate them on what these things mean? I mean, that's gotta be part of this before they vote.
Well, and I wanted to just sort of jump ahead. I'm going to jump ahead to a slide. So we did hear from you that perhaps this type of process is a little cumbersome for the public to digest in terms of an open house forum, and give us these numbers. It just seemed a little. And so we thought about it, and we kind of agree that. We have some goals for an open house. We certainly want to share all of the information we've gathered in terms of the problem locations and elicit anything that we may have missed and share the results of the model, which should overlap, really, would overlap. We'd expect that. Solutions, we want to, and this is an educational opportunity here that's going to really help with the MS4 program, helping to show what a green street would look like, what a floodplain enhancement project would look like. And we have examples, we can, in posters, and so there is an educational component. And the idea here is you have these stations, and so the public arrives, they do sit through a presentation. It's not as detailed as what we hear in our meetings here, but it's a high level, real high level. And then there's, time to go to the stations. And so when you get to station 1 and 2, or we've just described. So hearing your feedback, we think station 3 is a little bit of a softer prioritization. We have a couple ideas. We wanted to just get your feedback on these. So knowing that our goal is to two things we want to get and we want to give. So we want to try to get input from them, and we want to hear their opinions on priorities. We also want to have them share their priorities with us. So we want to document and we want to capture and record. So. Imagine a poster where we have some categories that are a little bit of a more layperson friendly than some of our runoff volume reduction. I mean, what does that mean? And so we would kind of put these into a little more user-friendly words and have the public show us with dots or sticky notes or some visual way, show us your top 3 and show us your bottom 3. And then maybe we can start to see where the community priorities are. And then, asking another alternative, or in addition to, we thought, well, let's talk about, what are the most important considerations on a project level? Like if you as a public member were selecting a project, what are your top considerations? And then maybe they fill out a form and they just rank, and that's an anonymous thing, and we put that into its own, the results of which then feed the overall prioritization effort. So it's not as if we would have 10 additional respondents and their priorities and their weights that then feed the process. It's sort of the sum total of the public becomes like a data point. Does that kind of, so I'm sort of sharing with this with you, first, and looking for feedback, because we heard that maybe our original plan for that third station was a little too difficult to manage. So we think this might be a good alternative that we'd like to hear your feedback on.
So I have a couple of comments. First of all, could I put all 3 of my green dots on flood reduction? I mean, I can do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm looking at, there's a couple of comments I have here. One is, there are things that the public doesn't really have any, for instance, doesn't have any say in. So for instance, regulatory compliance is, you got to do it. So shouldn't be a choice. It's got to be done.
Yeah, well, true.
I mean, you can't ask somebody, do you want to do it? Because we have to do it. So why ask them?
Well, but is it more important that the township is compliant with the regulations over low cost? I don't know. I mean,
Well, but
doesn't matter.
we have to do it. What was that, Ken?
The ultimate red herring.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with you. It almost should be taken off because they know not what they say.
Well, that's a, yeah,
I get the
okay.
point that it's on the list.
That's good feedback.
Yeah. And then, so increased trees, pollution control, stream protection, are they all the same thing?
Some people really value urban canopy. Huge, huge value. Some people value it more in their neighborhood than they might in, along a riparian corridor.
But
I don't know.
how does, I guess my question with that is, how does that benefit flood or volume reduction? I mean, our goal, our main goal is stormwater, and if we can achieve stormwater with improving the community environment, that's a bonus, but.
Right. Well, and that's what would happen. It would be it's almost like the combination of the criteria or the goals help rank projects and sort them as what's a better project because it meets more of the criteria than just one. Now, it's a multi-benefit project is going to rank higher than a single benefit project. That's really what a prioritization outcome would lead us to, right?
I like the qualitative feel to this.
Okay.
And I like the way you're asking him to do that. I am struggling with the categories because it seems like they're all over the map.
This was, yeah, okay. Well, but remember, it's tell us what are your top three, and
Of course we want low cost. I mean, like,
yeah, what? This is true.
So we've presented this before, but this is what the outcome would look like. And maybe you can have this by study area. So maybe you'd have like the 5 projects or whatever in each study area that are ranked. Or you could have it overall for the whole study. And you could see all the different criteria in this case: tree canopy, cost per greened acre, greened acres, which is how much impervious area you're capturing, public amenities. So you can see the different categories and how they fall out for each of these. So the ones that hit more categories at higher levels, they're the ones that go to the left of this, higher ranked.
Well, and I like these type of graphics because it's interesting if you look at the number 1 project, just the level of green, which is the O&M needs per project versus the one next to it. I mean, it's a big portion of that total project score is the O&M maintenance needs per project versus but it's still scored higher.
so this is public input, this one?
No, this one was client input, actually.
Yeah, I can see how a client would be interested in O&M. I'm not sure if a public would be.
Well, they should be, because if we educate them about the cost of operations and maintenance and explain that some things have a different maintenance cost than others, I mean, I think that's an important life cycle cost that goes a little beyond just the capital cost up front. But.
Though you're dealing with the public, and a public approach to this is you got to fix the stormwater. They're not going to care about the maintenance cost. That's up to the township. It falls into the township budget. They're not going to care about the tree canopy and that kind of thing. When you get right down to it, this delineation is going to give you 5 projects to look at. And then you're going to start to really delve into those 5 projects and see which ones are really doable, and what the cost is. Ultimately, for the township, they're going to be looking at 5 projects with a series of costs and results. And it doesn't matter what's on this plan. This just gets you down so that you can choose the top 5, if you will.
Yeah, right.
And I'm not sure that this kind of approach is going to work with the public.
Which is where we were, last week.
What's the sequence? I mean, you say you're going to model, and then will the modeling results be part of what the public sees?
Well, they're not going to see, like, on a project level, the flood volume reduction for project I-2.
Well, so, I mean, when we did Banbury Way, you gave us this dollars per, inch or something. I can't remember what it is. Is that what we're talking about, the outcome of your modeling? And why wouldn't that be? You're saying it's just because we don't have enough time that they wouldn't be part of? I mean, I would want to know what's the impact. I mean, wouldn't that be
Well-
the first choice for a project?
Well, so for each criteria, there's two things. There's the score. So constructability, maybe from 1 to 10 or 0 to 10, 10 being the least difficult, 0 being the most difficult, from a constructability standpoint. So for each of the criteria, it gets a score. Now, from a flood reduction standpoint, we can come up with, once we ran the model, we could see what all the individual flood reductions are, and we could say, okay, well, we can start to break that up, that the highest level of flood reduction gets a full 10. So that's more quantitative. Now, some of those might be more qualitative, public amenity. We may just have to say, well, it's highly visible by retention. That'll get a full 10 in terms of the amenity. But there's some subjectivity there. But so there's the score, but then there's the weight, and I think it's the weight that's more like, well, what's most important to you?
Yeah, but I mean, if I'm part of the public making this decision, I would want to see the numbers for each of the projects. Because I want to see, does, Midland do more than the train tracks, I mean, I want to know what's the numbers. I don't want to throw out just arbitrary number.
So the
Well,
idea of the process is to outside of the scores of the projects, to tell us your priorities so that there can be the removal of any intentional or unintentional weighting towards a certain project over another, because you.
Yeah, but I'm not trying. I'm
No,
just
go ahead.
finishing it. So I'm not trying to weight one project over. I just want to know if project A is not constructible, and project B can give me a great reduction and it's constructible, why wouldn't I choose project B? I mean, what else would I do there?
Well, and it would fall out if you give the constructible a lower weight in your criteria.
Well, and I guess, and I'm not speaking for the public, but just because you've been to 1 to 10 meetings, Ken, your goal is when you come to our meetings is flooding. So I think the people who are going to come to this meeting are going to be people who live in areas that are prone to flooding. They're not coming to see if it's a public amenity or ownership. I mean, their main goal is to give that flood reduction and runoff reduction a 10.
Right, so the projects that score the 10 is regardless of the community input. That 10 on a project is based on the model results for the flood modeling, okay? But how that project is ranked in terms of its being number 1 or number 5 on your list is based on the weight you give the criteria of flood reduction. Obviously, that's a hugely important criteria for the majority of the community here. So if it would probably be like 80% of I'm going to give it 80%, and I'm going to take that 20% and scatter it through the remaining criteria. So that helps then when you run this prioritization, multi-criteria prioritization tool. It basically takes the score of the project and the weight, the score of each project and its weight of the criteria, and sums it up, and each project ends up with this final score, which is that bar chart we looked at. And so that's how projects that meet more criteria are going to rank higher than projects that just meet one criteria, which I think is the goal here, which we don't, well, I mean, obviously flood reduction is the goal, but I've heard it said before, flood reduction and regulatory and all these other things are important as well.
Well, wait, but the public input is the colored dots. This is a separate process, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think, yeah, that's a really good point. We've heard that we don't think it's a really easy, and I don't think it's easy to take the public through this type of effort. And so I don't think, so we're agreeing on that. Yeah, so yes, we're agreeing on that.
Yeah, so if you went back to that list that you had up there with the dot thing, which was down below, I guess I love what you got, station 1, 2, 3. I like that a lot. I guess the only place, yeah, I like that. Because I think this is mainly, I honestly think this is mainly educational. I really do.
It's really important.
What I don't like is that list,
Okay, we can work on
Yeah.
this. That's easy.
because it feels all over the map.
Okay.
And if I go back,
And maybe it's just 6 options.
so the weights don't necessarily have to add up to 100, by the way. You could say flood reduction is 100%, runoff volume is 100%, maybe constructability is 50%. It's just how much, how important is that? That's all that is. So they don't necessarily have to add to 100.
In our tool, they do. Yeah.
Then each project is going to get a number. Which
Correct.
you multiply times their weight. So.
Exactly, that's all it
You know,
is.
it's why it
and
doesn't have to add all up.
Frankly,
It's going to be the sum of the products that give you your total.
and frankly, tonight you could go through, I know Regina and Joe aren't here, but you can assign weights to all these.
Anonymous.
Yeah. You could say they're all 100%, and make it really interesting. But I mean, that's another option. And then you do this, as you said, the workshop more for educational benefits and to really see, are we way off? Have we grossly underestimated or misinterpreted the public's needs and wants?
So let me just be devil's advocate a little bit here, as if I don't do that all the time. Why wouldn't I just turn to you and say, what do you recommend? Because you're the expert.
Yeah, well, Paul, that's what the public's going to do. They're not going to necessarily turn to Dan. They're going to turn to this group and say, what do you recommend? They want to see results. They want to see the stormwater reduced. And then they're going to turn to the board and say, why aren't you building it?
And so this is just to help, this is one of probably a number of processes that can help with just decision-making when you have capital budget and projects that have multi-criteria benefits. And that's why it's a multi-criteria benefit tool.
And I think the outcome, again, that ranked list of projects, 29 or whatever it ends up being, I don't think it means that you have to go, the highest ranked project has to be implemented first. You may, that may be 4 years worth of budget, frankly. Like, I don't know. You may need to pick and choose. You may want to look at, as I mentioned before, what about from one individual area, and what's that ranking look like? It's really just a tool to really understand which are the projects that we should be focusing on. But I don't think it necessarily forces you to go in that, in that order. I think Regina was saying something similar to, at the last meeting, that it's valuable, but we're still going to be looking at it, in a reasonable way and what makes the most sense.
So what's the timing for the modeling?
Well, so I think the next meeting is coming up quickly, and So I think realistically we'll have several of the areas with the projects modeled, but probably not all the areas for that meeting. But we'll be working away, and so some projects are more easily modeled than others. I mentioned the detention basin retrofits. They may take a little bit more time. We may have to go back out to some of these and take some measurements of the outlet structure, really, see how detailed we need to get on that. But
We're not waiting for this. Is that what we're saying? We're not waiting for these results to do a meeting, or we're going to wait to have some more information to present and and have that ready for a public meeting?
well, is it even possible to do the public meeting before the next SWIMAC meeting? Because that would be tight,
Yeah,
right?
probably not.
Right.
The goal of the public meeting, what Dan is showing here, what we have, say, I'll use 29 projects. the public would be interested that we are looking at as many projects as we are. They'd also be interested in where those projects are. Hey, is my neighborhood included? And they'd be interested in seeing how projects tie into each other. You fix this, but this happens, that kind of thing. And we have enough information that I'm sure you can make displays up that would interest the public. But when you get right down to choosing those final projects, they're going to look to this board and this group.
Well, and right, and that's what I'm thinking, that's going to take time to digest, to really, that's a process that's going to take some time that
And
I
that's why
think the public process will help in that I don't think we should wait till get the modeling results. I think even what you presented tonight, just to see the maps and the drainage areas and the spots that, I mean, I think that's at a level that the public could jump in at that point.
Yeah, I think it's important to do it sooner rather than later. Steve and I were talking too, that you might even get some feedback as to dates of events, and it might be able to be a calibration tool for some of the areas, make sure that the model is coinciding with what people are seeing.
That's a good point. Bring pictures. I guess we can offer that.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
we probably need about 2 weeks just to, like, once a date's selected, we would need a good 2 weeks to probably prepare materials and make sure there's a good press release, and which would help.
So if our next meeting then is November 10th, and we're saying that that's not going to be possible, and then 2 weeks after that is Thanksgiving, so that really throws us into December, early December, and our early meeting it is early in December, it's the 8th.
Let's have it between after Thanksgiving, but before our next December meeting.
Week of the 28th.
That would be the 1st, like the week before, December 1st. And I guess my only other comment is just, because I know a lot of people do work, I don't know how great a crowd we're going to get at 4 p.m.
Yeah,
I
we could
think-
move that to like 5 to 8
Or like, I mean, even 6 to 9, if there's a lot of people who work a 9 to 5 job.
There's a lot of people that go better early too, so you, I mean, come on.
I know, but
But yeah, I hear you.
Just do it for both of them.
like, let's load up on Starbucks. I'm just thinking I would hate for people who work and I know there's people who would want to be here that I know work and probably could barely get here by like 5:30, 6 o'clock, or split the
Well,
difference,
it would be-
5:30 to 8:30, just,
Well, remember, it's like 2 sessions, so,
We could stagger it,
so
the times.
Let's think, we could do like 30 minutes each session, each station, and then a third, even though I say 15-minute presentation, 15-minute Q&A, and then you can do 30-minute at each station. So literally, someone only has to come for like the presentation, the Q&A, and then they can like jump through the stations as fast as they want. So you would do, and if let's just say 4 o'clock presentation starts 4:05, and then the second presentation would be 6:05. And so, it would, and the idea is that you're giving the same presentation twice. You know, you're giving the same, whoever's standing at the station and working it would, you know, answer the same questions and share the same, you know, comments, and so it would kind of be like a 2-for-1. So that's why we said 4 to 8. We could easily do 5 to 8 and just do maybe 20 minutes at each station, and then it's 2 1.5-hour events.
Yeah,
That-
putting the
I
dots
think-
on isn't going to take 30 minutes.
No, I think it's more of like it's, you know, and the idea is we would definitely want to entice with some beverages and snacks. I'm not sure how easy it is to, you know. And then, you know, you definitely want to try to get as many of the stakeholders to come, including elected officials, and because it's really a great opportunity to talk to the community and hear from them directly. So.
do we want to pick a date and kick off the holiday season with a public work meeting? An open house, kick off the holiday season. December 1st would be the week before our December 8th meeting.
You say
Thursday the 1st. I guess the question is too, is this room available?
Well, there's all that,
First won't work. Okay, thank
There we
you.
go.
And are Thursdays the only days of the
Well,
week that you
Well,
prefer?
are we setting this, if we need to have it in this room, then we first thing to do is find out when this room is available.
Why don't we just have it on the 8th then? If we know it's available on
That's
our
good.
meeting, we'll just swap out our normal monthly meeting.
That?
And this way we know the room's available.
Maybe not, we don't get in here all the
It's
time.
not always, any
How about
specific dates over there?
The 8th. That's our normal meeting.
In this room, yeah.
This room, yes, correct. You guys are in this room.
Do we want to set it for the 8th?
And for what time is it available? Is there anything?
Right.
What, any specific time, like 5 o'clock on, 4 o'clock on?
Maybe have
You could have it whenever.
work session here
Yeah.
on the
You have
22nd.
it scheduled for 7, but you could have it 5 if you want. Cool. Something in here before you.
Do we want to do like a 5 to 8 on December 8th?
Yeah.
How's that sound?
Sure.
Now, you're not going to have your regular scheduled meeting then?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
I mean, if worst came to worst, and we needed to do it in one of the other rooms to prepare or whatever, we could always do it like on the 1st.
Well, we
No,
could
you're
meet
gonna do
from
the
8
8th
to
to
9.
Room's wide open.
No, but I'm saying if we scheduled this public meeting for the 8th, if we needed to meet,
Well, why don't we say 5 to 8, and then we'll meet from 8 to 9?
could you?
Uh,
No.
We won't.
I have a feeling it's going to run longer than 8. Something's
Especially
just,
if you've got the cookies, Paul.
I was going to bring hoagies at that point.
so you want, does December 8th sound good?
If you could just send something to, I guess, it's either Rossini, it's either Leah, whoever you, just send that to them and then tell them to tell me, but you're fine with that.
And does that give you enough time, Dan and Courtney?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the room would be available at 5, even though the swim act doesn't usually meet till 7? That works? Oh, okay. Oh, okay, great. And then I can get in
If you
at,
just go through the right channels to make sure you tell Leah or Steve, then tell me. You know, I'm going to note it, but I can't do anything officially until they. tell
okay,
me.
Yeah, if you need the room reconfigured, let them know too,
yeah, okay.
from the seats.
Yes.
If they need the room reconfigured,
Oh, you mean like tables and stuff? Yeah. That's really tough to record, but we can do it. It just is tougher sound and stuff for recording.
Well, the open house is going to be set up with just one 15-minute presentation and then 15-minute Q&A, and then it's sort of a breakout and go to stations. So we would just use the existing tables and we just strategically place them around.
Recording like.
Yeah, but
Why, I
do
don't
we
think,
even need to?
I don't think you
No,
want
you
to,
wouldn't.
I don't think you want to record, things that are
station.
supposed to be anonymous.
Right, I think that it's, that particular meeting, I don't think should be televised.
No, what, yeah, I think televising it,
You're going to have, well, if, you're going to put constraints on yourself if you
Come
try and
out.
televise.
was, yeah.
The portions are supposed to be anonymous.
Are-
I'd have a concern with,
Yeah.
that
But
people may not even want people to know they're here.
can I ask whether the educational material and the maps would be available online so that people who can't make it can at least look at them?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we haven't, like, brainstormed actually, like, how many maps. I think there's 3 categories of solutions, so we would have 3 posters of solutions, and we could certainly PDF that and put.
Yeah, just a
post
slide,
that. Yeah.
slow or show or
The
something.
slideshow,
During-
definitely.
During the November meeting, we should be able to tell us what you're going to do.
Oh, yeah.
And get our input as to whether we need to do more or less, that kind of thing. So, but by that time, you should
We'll have
have
our
the
list
concept
station
pretty much pinned down as to what you want to do.
Oh, great, thanks.
I can put anything on the website you like if you send it.
Great.
Thank you.
Interactive, so they can post their dots on the website.
I was wondering about that.
Well, we could do a Google map.
Yeah.
I mean, we can do like a, we could, and.
But
thinking
in
about it.
reality, that should all happen after the meeting.
Yeah.
Because we want to get the public here to the meeting. You know, if we post all that ahead of time, then it's
Oh,
going
yeah.
to raise issues.
Oh, I completely agree.
So-
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Thanks.
That's all I
Okay,
had.
that concludes, our meeting.
Excellent.